Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we're diving back into one of my favourite topics, and that is poetry. It's been a little while, but as with all things, sometimes I need a break between tackling topics, which is why you get such varied content on my channel. But today we are going to be talking about Drake and his poetry book, because he released one and it is really, really terrible. I think there's a chance that this poetry book is possibly worse than any other poetry book I've reviewed on this channel. And that is saying something, because I've reviewed a lot of poetry books. Now, Titles Ruin Everything is the first collection of poetry from musician, rapper, and former Degrassi star, which is the only place I actually know him from, Drake, or Aubrey Graham. He calls it a poetry book, but honestly that is a bit of a stretch. It's more like a jumbled collection of petty, half-baked insults carelessly tossed towards some anonymous woman who, let's be honest, we can only hope is of legal age given his dating history and need to constantly creep on teenagers. I mean message teenagers, sorry. Message. Throughout the content of this book, though, there is absolutely no use of any poetic technique, nothing creative or artistic about it, and it has more than a slight whiff of misogyny surrounding it. Even the cover itself is terribly designed, it's very ugly, no thought has gone into how this piece is going to look on your bookcase, it's just a bit of a mess. Now, I know, the cover design is like a minor thing, not really a big deal, but, you know, honestly, it's really important that especially the spine of a book is very easily recognisable. When you have quite a large poetry collection like I do, when you have a lot of books like I do, you really want to be able to just scan your bookshelves and pick it out straight away. You want to be able to read that title, see that title, make it distinctive, you know? I find that Halsey's poetry book, her cover is a painting that she's done herself. It's beautiful, it's stunning, it stands out. So a cover's not necessarily important for the contents of the book, but it just makes the experience of reading, picking out the books, having them on display in your house, it makes it all a little easier, you know? With this book, it is so ugly on the outside, and it feels like he's trying to do something different with it for the sake of being different, rather than for it actually having any benefit to the reader or someone trying to identify the book from a distance, you know? Well, that was an off-script rant. Anyway. This collection is advertised as a collection of never-before-published poems written together with his longtime friend, Kenza Samir. Mate, this person is not your friend, and Drake is not a friend to them. Friends don't let friends publish books this bad. Flowing across 168 pages, the provocative musings translate Graham's wit and talent for wordplay into potent stanzas. Together, these meditations on fame, romance, and relationships offer an unfiltered view of the artist's inner world. Now, I have a question about this. Can you really call random single lines of 2 to 6 words stanzas? And seriously, wit? Talent? Where? I might sound like I'm being harsh, but wait till you hear the poems. Can we just please stop mistaking misogyny and slut-shaming for wit, because they're really not the same thing. And of these 168 pages, honestly, about 95% of them are completely empty. Each page has like one barely there line to it. It's a mess. This book is actually subtitled Streams of Consciousness, which makes me a little concerned for how empty Drake's head must be. Now, sadly, this book is sold out most places online, so I couldn't get an actual copy myself. However, I searched the internet, I looked up and down, and I actually managed to find a whole bunch of pages of the book posted online in various screenshots and photos and videos and all sorts of stuff. So there's actually a lot of the book out there for free. Not as much as I would like, but enough to talk about in a video. But just bear that in mind. In terms of this review, I haven't been able to read it as a complete piece from start to finish. I've just had to piece bits together from throughout the book. That doesn't mean my criticisms of the individual pieces are any less valid. It just means there's like a 5% chance that I'm missing something, and that, like, you know, maybe if you read it all in one go, this is a piece of art. But as it stands, I really highly doubt that, and you'll see why as we start reading this stuff. First up, let's enjoy a little misogyny, because we might as well get it out of the way straight away, right? Here's the first poem we're going to look at. Poem. There are 2 types of women in this world. Women who like giving head, and women who I don't like. Oh, what a waste of paper. Trees died for this. It's not worth it. Not at all. Bring back the trees, I say. Sadly, this is typical of every poem in this book. In fact, this is one of the longest ones. This is one of the ones with the most substance to it. But there's nothing interesting about this, is there? Like, not at all. There's no rhythm to it, there's no rhyme. He didn't even bother to use any kind of repetition in a creative or fun way. The only thing it relies on is humour that isn't even funny, because again, it's not humour, it's misogyny, pure and simple. Can we stop mixing up misogyny and wit, misogyny and humour, misogyny and again, it's just a joke, get over it. They are not the same. The punchline to this poem, can we stop thinking poems need to have a punchline, please? It's just, anyway, the punchline to this poem isn't clever or original or even funny, it's just nothing. It is nothing more than reducing women to sexual objects. It is dehumanizing. A woman apparently has no worth to him unless she is heterosexual or at least bi, attracted to him and willing to put his penis in her mouth on demand. It is sickening, and I really thought in 2023 we would be past these kinds of jokes by now, but apparently we're not, and that's why it still needs calling out. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a poem with good humour. I really, really do. I've spoken plenty about some of my favourite poets being humorous poets. People like Wendy Cope. I've covered so many of her poems in my various other videos. I have a whole poetry playlist if you want to go check them out. Wendy Cope even edited a great little anthology. It's a tiny, tiny collection that's really, really digestible if it's one you want to check out. And it's called The Funny Side, 101 Humorous Poems. Great. Some really, really hilarious stuff in there. There's another collection I love called Dancing by the Light of the Moon, which is collected and has a wonderful running commentary by Giles Brandis. This collection has tons of short and humorous poems in it, including Strickland Gillian's Lines on the Antiquity of Microbes, or Fleas as it's sometimes known, which is very simply, it spans 2 lines and it just reads, Adam, Adam. It's great. 9 letters, 4 syllables, yet it manages to make you giggle alongside a genuinely clever use of rhyme, rhythm, strong imagery, a clever use of homophones, and it was really, really unique for the time it was written. And the other important thing to remember is that this wasn't the extent of Gillian's writing career. He was an established and talented author who wrote more than just 5 to 15 word poems, you know? This humorous little 2-liner was a light-hearted and welcome reprise from some of his more serious and heavy work. Unlike Drake, whose attempts at jokes and calling them poems and constant confusion of misogyny played up as wit is all completely one note. You know, it's interesting, if Drake had actually done something interesting with this poem, even if he just like had a consistent rhyme scheme, even if he'd had like some sort of rhythm in there, I wouldn't be so angry about it. Keep your misogyny if you want. I'll still complain about it. You can keep it if you want. You can have the same message if you want. Just do something creative with it. Like if he'd said, for example, there are 2 types of women in the world, the ones who give head when I get them in bed and the ones I kick to the curb instead. Look at that. You've still got plenty of disgusting misogyny at the core, but this time you've also got a catchy rhythm, a catchy rhyme. If he'd put more than 20 seconds of thought into it, he could have easily done this too. It's not hard. I wrote that thing in the lift of my building going between the 2nd and the ground floor. Let's look at some other examples of short, witty poems. One of my favourite poets of all time is Edna St. Vincent Millay. In her poem First Fig, this is the epitome of short but sweet, unlike anything Drake has ever written. My candle burns at both ends, it will not last light. Ah, but my foes and oh my friends, it gives a lovely light. It's a really short, really catchy poem about how sometimes it's better to put in a lot of effort for a short period of time to get some really amazing but short-lived pleasure and beauty than to struggle through for a long time just managing to scrape by, okay? It's catchy, it's clever, it's well written, you have some really interesting poetic techniques in here even though it's short, and it's got a really interesting meaning. Unlike Drake's poem. I don't know what really offends me more about Drake's writing, the laziness of his poem or the misogyny. Both are bad, I just don't know which one offends me to my core more. Like, as I said, literally the only point of this poem from him is suck my pee-pee or I don't like you. It is pathetic. It actually, the first time I read this, it reminded me of a clip from Degrassi. So If you guys don't know Degrassi, it's great. It was like one of my guilty pleasures as a teenager, and honestly kind of still is to this day. Basically, it's like this Canadian teen show set in a high school. It started in the 80s, and then there was a reboot in like the early 2000s, I think, that went on quite a while, and then Netflix picked it up for a bit. Anyway, iconic, great. And Drake actually got his start in that in the very early seasons of Degrassi Next Generation, I want to say, as this character called Jimmy. Great in it, loved him. But there's this clip of him as this character Jimmy and Jimmy's best friend Spinner, and they're rapping this like really awful song with like really misogynistic lyrics, while Craig and Marco just like look on confused like, what the hell, guys? And obviously, like, in the show, in this clip, they're made fun of for this and how bad it is, but this kind of rap that the character of Jimmy was mocked for is genuinely like the sort of stuff that Drake is writing in this poetry book, and it genuinely makes it seem like he never progressed past lyrics like this that were written for him as a joke when he was like 14. Watch the clip, and at the end of the video, when you've heard everything, tell me it wouldn't be out of place in this book.
A homie is a player, and that is all. So why'd you have to go and kick his ball and chain? Ain't that your name? Cause you a player hater, and that's a shame. And chicks like you ain't worth too much. So shut up, girl, and make my lunch. Yeah!
The misogyny continues throughout the book with other poems like this. It's always some unemployed hoe trying to work my nerves. That's it. That's the whole poem. Like, is it not just time we got over this whole lol, women gold diggers, lol, women nag, lol, women shouldn't ever be sexually active unless it's with me and only me thing, which men like this seem to think is funny. It's not funny. It's not clever, it's not original, it's not true. But seriously, who is Drake to complain about the women he's going for being unemployed when most of them aren't even old enough to have left school yet? Can we remember the times he slid into Millie Bobby Brown's DMs when she was like 13, 14? Can we talk about the model he dated who he met when she was 14 and then only started dating when she turned 18? Or have we forgotten the time he groped and kissed a 17-year-old on stage? Honestly though, whether or not these women have jobs or not, regardless of their sexual experience, yeah, I can understand why they're annoyed with Drake. He's misogynistic, dumb, and always creeping on teenagers. I'm on their side here. You work his nerves, ladies. Work his nerves. Go on. I support you. Here is another example. She is coming through to meet my career. I invited her over to experience her pictures. Ha 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 ha. Women only want me for my money, and I only want them to sexualize them and then throw them away. So witty. So clever. What a talent for wordplay. Honestly though, I wouldn't be surprised if this was his experience. Women clearly aren't flocking to him for his personality or intelligence or kindness, are they? Another example. My talents include a pen. Yours include a bed. We're both skilled, nonetheless. Gonna be honest though, if this is the extent of Drake's skill with a pen, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and suggest that the woman is actually more talented in this case. Okay, I know I'm sounding moody and bitter and blah 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 blah, but all this stuff angers me because these jokes at the expense of women aren't just silly jokes. They're not just, oh, not that serious, get over it. They do have serious consequences. Creators and celebrities like Drake, especially when they're as big as Drake are, have such a huge influence on their audience and just culture in general, you know? Especially the young men who look up to him. And when men, young men, teenage boys, especially those who are more vulnerable, see a man like Drake that they respect behaving like this, they're also going to think it's okay for them to do it too. People like Drake create this misogynistic content like this and act like it's all normal, and then when we call it out for being misogynistic and awful and damaging, they just turn around like, oh, you were just bitter, silly woman, me. It creates a culture that makes it dangerous to be a woman and makes it dangerous if you call out that it's dangerous to women. All you have to do is read books like Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates to see the actual real life consequences of this and similar content. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that by making jokes about how women are just sex objects hoes and gold diggers, Drake is single-handedly responsible for all the violence against women. Of course, I'm not saying that, but he is a significant piece in a bigger system. When we let jokes like this slip and pretend it's art or poetry and congratulate him for his wit, his talent, and make good, he's so funny, he's just making observations. When we still celebrate people like Drake after we've seen him publicly grope teenage fans who are, in that moment, a victim of power imbalances from his celebrity status, huge age difference, and the public nature of his actions, when we've seen strong evidence to suggest that he has attempted to groom teenage actresses and models repeatedly, when we allow all that to happen and don't call it out, it all clears a path for more and more men to fall further down the path of misogyny, especially if they are vulnerable and or young men. In her book, Laura Bates writes about one of the more extreme examples of online misogyny, and they are incel forums. Now, I've had my own run-ins with incels in the past. When I covered their content about 5 years ago or so, maybe a little longer now, they got so mad at me for calling out their misogyny that they started trying to track down my home address. I spoke about this before, they collected my partner at the time, they collected his work email address, and they were trying to figure out from that where we lived. They were going through my Instagram posts, trying to figure out like, oh, what's in the background of this photo? Okay, we've narrowed it down to this borough of London. Can we figure out more and more like where she lives, what building she's in, that sort of thing. They sent me rape threats. They said that they wanted to track me down so they could throw acid in my face. They were like really, really disgusting and graphic threats. I had to get the police involved. It was terrifying. These kinds of men who spew this misogyny online like this are not just sad, lonely, angry men. They're dangerous. Laura writes about the average user on an incel forum. Every single day he saw hundreds of messages like this. I hate all women. They're the scum of the earth. If you're a woman, you happen to be reading this, I hate you, effing whore. Or this. Women are disgusting, vile parasites. The more he saw, the less extreme it seemed. Eventually, the ideas became normal. And this is the problem. It's all about desensitization. For men like my partner or my friends at the writing group that I go to, I read some of Drake's poems to them and they were all really, really shocked at cries of, well, he doesn't understand women. How can he say this stuff? That's super messed up. Lots of giggles at his expense, that sort of thing. Because these are good men, right? They see the problem, they see the misogyny, they call it out. But suppose you're exposed to these sentiments when you're younger, before you've fully developed critical thinking skills. Suppose you're exposed to them at a time when you're vulnerable. Maybe you're lonely, you're sad, you've just been dumped, so you're a little bit angry in general. Suppose you hear them constantly from someone you respect, like Drake. You might start to think, well, yeah, it's normal. Women are just hoes and gold diggers. Women must just be using me for money, so it's only fair that I just use them as sex objects. What use is a woman if she doesn't make me orgasm on demand? The more you hear this stuff, especially from people you respect, and especially if you're feeling emotional or insecure or vulnerable, the more normal it becomes. Soon you start hearing statements like, I don't like women who don't give me blowjobs every day, and it becomes normal, acceptable, just a fact in your mind. And then you start hearing, I'm angry at women. Women cause all the problems in the world. We should do something about it. And soon that starts to become normal and acceptable to hear. And so soon that escalates again, and you start seeing people talk about inciting violence against women, and that becomes normal too. And soon actual acts of violence against women also become normal to you because you're desensitized to them. It's easy to hear me say this and say, pah, that's just a slippery slope fallacy. Don't be silly. But it's really not, because this is the reality of what actually has happened to thousands of men. Whole communities of people, entire cultures exist today all over the world where violence against women is not only normal, but it's legal, and in some places it is expected. This slippery slope, this desensitization process isn't just a hypothetical. It's not a, oh, well, I guess this could happen. It's a no, this has happened. We have seen it happen, we see it continue to happen, and it's dangerous. This is why women die. Laura Bates herself wrote while browsing the incel forums for research for her book. Even as a woman herself, she began to get used to seeing all this misogynistic hate. She wrote, I became used to seeing women referred to as voids, barely registered the incitements to initiate misogynistic massacres, skimmed over posts about rape, because they were just so common. Finally, one day I read a post about giving a Floyd the violence she deserved in order to avoid being cooked, and I realised that I understood every word. In short, I got used to it. Drake doesn't just normalise this kind of misogynistic rhetoric though. There are actually lots of similarities between incel culture and other misogynistic online communities and Drake's poetry. One of the conclusions that Bates drew from the incel forums in particular was that incel logic seems to reveal a hopeless contradiction. Women are simultaneously reviled for sleeping with men and for refusing to do so. One user, for example, describes women as greedy, selfish, evil-crazed sluts who prevent decent, hard-working men from achieving their biological purpose. The problem is not women having sex, but women having the choice of whom they have sex with. Let's revisit Drake's poetry with that in mind, shall we? In his poems, women only have value if they're giving him blowjobs, but also if a woman is sleeping with him, she must be a gold digger and a hoe that he can just use and discard, right? Again, the problem isn't so much with women having sex in general, it's having the choice over who they have sex with, why, and how. Another quote from Bates: "There is the notion that women are dehumanized objects, subhumans who are either too evil or too stupid to deserve to make decisions about their own lives and bodies. This idea promotes a complete disconnection from the idea of women as people who are capable of suffering, grieving, enjoying sexual pleasure, or making rational decisions." Now, is she talking about the incel forums or Drake's poetry? Obviously she's talking about incel forums, but these are the same ideas that Drake pushes in his poetry about unemployed hoes and the like. Or take the woman whose only skill is in bed. There's no way Drake sees her as a complete human. He defines her entire worth by her use as a sex object. Meanwhile, he's different because he's a well-rounded, deep artist who creates things. But it's okay because we both have skills. It's just yours is being used by me. In conclusion, Drake's poetry sounds like something that an angry incel would tweet, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. Let's move on to some other stuff, shall we? Let's look at another poem from him that is just one line. "Your taste in men isn't exactly Michelin star." Really telling on himself there, isn't he? What have we got to say about this, really? At most, we've got some cohesive imagery, I guess. The play on tastes and Michelin star, all being centered around food and restaurants and maybe to some extent consumerism and choosing expensive over quality. Okay, maybe I'm being too generous with that last interpretation, but there was an attempt, I guess. Sadly, not much else to say about it, is there? You know, some people think it's unfair to compare established poets with musicians who call themselves poets, although I don't quite understand the reasoning there. There are plenty of musicians who have published really great poetry. Take Halsey, for example. I reviewed her poetry book under pretty much the same circumstances of this one. I'm not really fans of either of their music because I haven't really listened to their stuff, so I went into both her book and this book with no expectations, no ideas about who they were as people, really. The difference is that Halsey's work spoke for itself. It was good. She clearly put a lot of time and effort and care into her book, and it really spoke to me. Drake didn't come close to any of that. I guess you could even argue there are similarities in themes of the book, you know, where Drake is like, lol taste. Halsey actually bothers to extend out those metaphors, really pick them apart and create some beautiful graphic imagery. I have a whole video on her poetry if you'd like to see that for yourself, but if you just want a quick recap and overview, as a bit of like, you know, comparison. Halsey uses a lot of really vivid imagery of food in her work to describe her body, her experiences, her sexuality, her sensuality, and it's stunning. To give you a few examples of lines, "I lick his lips from watermelon spread across my cheeks, and that pink sugar Chelsea smile is hiding underneath. Now I devour watermelon, bouncing on his knee." And then she also has passages with like descriptions of cherubs with Fuji apple red cheeks, dimples, and ivy leaves between their legs. She actually paints pictures in your mind that speak to all your senses. You feel the stickiness, you taste the sugar, you can almost smell the room, your skin prickles with what? Excitement, unease. It makes you feel something. And she's by no means the only one to have done this. Going back to the 1800s and you see amazing poets, like one of my favourites, Christina Rossetti. She wrote about women's sexual awakenings and all the dangers that come with it in poems like Goblin Market. Now, I think I did a more in-depth analysis of this poem, again, in my video on Halsey's poetry. But to give you a couple of examples of her food-related imagery, she talks about the goblins trying to tempt one of her characters with plump unpicked cherries, melons and raspberries, bloom down-cheeked peaches and swart-headed mulberries, wild free-born cranberries, and when she gives in, she dropped a tear more rare than pearl, then sucked their fruit globes fair or red, sweeter than honey from the rock, stronger than man-rejoicing wine, clearer than the water flowed the juice. She'd never tasted such before. How should it cloy with length of use? She sucked and sucked and sucked some more, fruits which that unknown orchard bore. She sucked until her lips were sore. And it's not just women who write like this either, don't get me wrong. Men can and have absolutely written beautifully and sensually, using these food images to create something beautiful. Take Edward Morgan's poem in which he writes about the strawberries glistening in the hot sunlight. We dip them in sugar looking at each other, not hurrying the feast for one to come. It's a beautiful poem about feeding your lover, sharing an experience, thoroughly enjoying the moment, paying attention to all your senses, and taking things slow until the moment you can be with them physically, and it's lovely. It's a poem about sensuality and pleasure and lust and love and connection, and it's beautiful. Drake could never. Once you hear these lines next to Drake's, it really puts into perspective how bad Your Taste in Men isn't exactly Michelin star is, doesn't it? It really shows you how bad that is. I actually wrote a poem myself with similar food-related imagery, very much inspired by Christina Rossetti actually, but mine was about hope and excitement and anticipation and finally opening yourself up to the possibility of love and romance and lust again after heartbreak and trauma. And it's in my first little poetry pamphlet, which is Reflections of Healing. It's available on Amazon now. And actually I do have a giveaway for this book that I'll talk about at the end of the video, so keep watching for that. And this has been out about 9 months now, but I am still very much an amateur when it comes to writing my own poetry. It's something I'm still learning. I have a long way to go. This was definitely just a little passion project for me and something that really helped me on my own journey of healing, hence the name. And I have this Poetry South Bank, like I say, about love and lust and excitement and being open to it again. And yeah, no, I read it. I get very, I don't know, embarrassed reading my own stuff. It doesn't come close to the work of like Rossetti or Morgan or even Halsey or anything like that, but it's, you know, it's an amateur interpretation of that. Standing on the South Bank, the sky is aglow with sapphires and plums, just begging to be plucked and sucked dry. Hunger swells. I want to feast, to ravish the flesh until the sweet juices drip down my chin like the bead of sweat forging a path down the back of my knee. We're caught up in meandering crowds like blossoms swept downstream until you stop. Rooted on the Millennium Bridge, you pick stars like pomegranate seeds and place each between my eager lips. The scent of anticipation saturates the air and I drink the last drops of twilight with you. So there is my poem. Okay, Scooby-Doo's come to say hi, haven't you, baby? What do you think of the poetry? Mine or Drake's? Give your honest opinion. You want to grumble? Want to say something? Silence. The harshest critic. You okay, Pud? I got ya. Can't you sit on my knee? Well done. Okay, let's move on to another of Drake's poems. There are a couple where he at least attempts to speak to the senses. For example, here he talks about smell. Those guys are so burnt out, we can smell it from here. Here we have sound. I am the soundtrack for lives that go on without me. Sight. Ooh, this is a unique one because we get 2 lines on 1 page. Madness. I can't read the signs, hun. I left my glasses at home. Well, I mean, senses, at least, I guess. Look, I'm really struggling to find something here. I'm trying to find something positive to say about this book. I'm just trying to find something to say about this work, but it's difficult. There is so little here to work with or talk about. Bye, Kitty Bear. How can you analyse a poem that gives you nothing? It's like asking someone to paint a picture of a close-up section of a piece of white paper. I mean, okay, let's be generous. We could potentially say the soundtrack one is a little clever in comparison with the others, based on the fact that Drake is a popular musician and people do have to keep listening to his music even when they move on from him, right? I kind of know what that's like from the other side. I've dated musicians who have literally gone on to write songs about me, and there's always that odd moment when like the song comes on in a bar or something and you're like, anyway, I say weird, it's not that weird at all because they're nice songs. So they're nice songs with people where things ended amicably, so maybe it's not the same at all. I feel like Drake really missed something here though, because this could have been a really, really interesting topic to explore through poetry. I want to hear him explore that aspect of creativity and art and what happens when you put your work out into the world and how that relates to everyday life and how we treat the people around us. You know, like once we've acted and that's had an effect on someone, our intentions often cease to matter and it becomes about how those actions have affected others. And it's kind of the same with art in a lot of ways. Once it goes out into the world, all that work we did encoding a message kind of ceases to matter, and it's all about how other people decode it and interpret it. Again, I have a whole video on that if you want to go and watch it. It dives deep into Marshall McLuhan's theory of like the medium as a message and all that sort of thing, and theories of encoding and decoding media. It's quite interesting. I recommend it. So if Drake had looked at that relationship between real lives and art and how our work affects other people and how other people affect our work, that could have been really interesting. I wish that had been explored more, but it just wasn't. Instead, this is like one of those, like, you know, one of 100 scribbled notes that you throw down in an old notebook when you're starting to write a poem and then you will come back to it later, but he didn't come back to it. He just thought, oh, I'll take this note and publish it. It's not a poem. There are so many interesting angles he could have taken. I'd have preferred if he'd gone into detail with that relationship that he has with people who listen to his music. All kinds of people, you know, the strangers he'll never meet, living lives he'll never know about, the superfans who've been there from the beginning who maybe overshare with him a little bit, the friends he lost when he became famous who maybe still listen to his music, the exes he's written songs about or the ones who've written songs about him, or whose work he has to continue to see in other ways, the people he's going to go on to meet in the future who already know him because of his music, that sort of thing. There's so many interesting angles he could have taken and looked at. There are really interesting things he could have examined in a poem, but he didn't because he's lazy. Now, moving on, or not as the case may be for Drake, let's look at another poem. Everest is probably easier to get over than you. Well, I guess we could argue this is an attempt at a metaphor-ish, but again, sorry, I'm hungry, my tummy's rumbling. But again, it just lacks any originality, sophistication, or development. It just lacks. Now, just like food imagery, natural imagery in poetry can be so powerful, especially when it comes to love poetry, or in this case, breakup poetry. To go back to Edna St. Vincent Millay again, because she is so great, she has a great poem about moving on, in which she talks about how she's been with someone for so long that it kind of becomes like staring into a bright light, like the sun, and how when you stare at that bright light for long enough, your vision starts to kind of get distorted, you know? It's so bright that you struggle to see anything else, and when you finally do turn away, everything else seems dark and gloomy in comparison, even if it isn't really. But you just need to give yourself and your eyes time to become accustomed to the darkerness. Not darkness, but darkerness. And she compares this to like when you leave a relationship. You might have thought everything was so great for so long, but once you're in that relationship, it kind of starts to skew and distort your vision and perspective on the world. And so when you finally leave that relationship, everything else might seem kind of crappy in comparison. But once you give yourself time to get over it and move on, you start realizing, hey, no, there's a hell of a lot of great stuff out here to see and experience and live, you know? I hope I'm explaining that right. Point is, like Drake, she uses natural imagery, but she is much more thoughtful, and honestly, she's more hopeful than Drake in this, in terms of breakup poetry, and it's also just far better written. Let me read you this whole poem, actually, because it's a lovely one. When I too long have looked upon your face, wherein for me a brightness unobscured, save by the mists of brightness has its place, and terrible beauty not to be endured, I turn away reluctant from your light, and stand irresolute, a mind undone, a silly dazzled thing deprived of sight, from having looked too long upon the sun. Then is my daily life a narrow room, in which a little while uncertainly, surrounded by impenetrable gloom, among familiar things grown strange to me. Making my way, I pause and feel and hark, till I become accustomed to the dark. Again, when you place these poems with similar themes next to each other, it's just quite embarrassing for Drake, isn't it? Speaking of embarrassing, I'm not for you really starting to put 2 and 2 together. But if you thought that number pun was stupid, don't worry. It gets worse. You're not thugging, you're kidding. One-sided beef is not beef. It's chicken. I read this to the people at my writing group and every single person just sat there confused until someone finally said like, but they're different animals. Seriously, this makes no sense. Like, I get what he was attempting, right? You've got an attempt at some internal rhyme with thugging and kidding, I think. Maybe it sounds better in his accent. So that's something. And then it's meant to be another play on food imagery and metaphors, right? So, because if you have beef with someone, that means you have drama or disagreement, an argument, bad feelings. But if those feelings are only one-sided between two people, Drake is saying it makes one of those people a chicken, which is a way to say someone is scared or cowardly, I guess. So it's a play on that, but the basic image of one-sided beef being chicken doesn't work on a literal or metaphorical level, and so it's just stupid. He could have said something like, if the beef's one-sided, you'll get burnt, which works on multiple levels, because, you know, on a literal level, it's true. If you cook a piece of meat on one side, it'll literally get burnt. But if a feud is one-sided, it'll also lead to someone getting metaphorically burnt, which means to be hurt or insulted or disrespected in some way, right? That metaphor works on multiple levels. One-sided beef is chicken doesn't. It's stupid. Look, I'm really trying to find something in this to talk about, but it's just stupid like the entire book. I'm honestly not sure which is worse. The parts of the book which are just lazy and lacking, like this. Some days I got it all figured out, but most days I never learn. Or parts where Drake attempts to be clever and it just falls flat because it's dumb and doesn't actually make any sense, like these ones. Having trouble figuring out if you're a devil missing a horn or a unicorn. Whoever wrote that blurb calling this book witty needs to lose their job. Now, before we finish, I want to make it clear that even though I haven't read the whole book and I'm only responding to a few bits, there were more than I've covered in this video, but time and stuff. I want to make it very clear that I am not the only one who disliked this book, and other poets who have read the whole thing, they also did not like it. When it was released, a bunch of news outlets asked other established poets what they thought about it, and they did not hold back, which made Drake quite angry. There's whole like embarrassing things of him like mocking poets online, and it's like, just grow up. So Hanif Abdurraqib, who has literally won awards for his poetry and is really brilliant, he told one journalist that while he isn't interested in trying to gatekeep poetry, and I quote, "None of these strike me as poems because they're not even attempting to push against any unknown in order to offer something revelatory or at least somewhat beautiful. Some of these are so absurd that they're actually funny." But it's hard to tell if he also understands that they're bending into absurdist humour and understands that there will be people who find it profound, or if he's convinced himself of his profundity. It's a perfect description. Meanwhile, Aris Kian, who is the Poet Laureate of Houston, says, "The book amounts to," and I quote, "a goldmine of mediocre mic drops, where he could push himself to indulge in the silliness and sentimentality that even the purest of poets would forgive. He disintegrates into petty abstractions and instead gives us lines like, 'You were in my dream last night.' They call that a nightmare, right? So I'm not at all the only one." And now, before I lose the will to live, that is where I'm going to end today's video. But before we do, I recently hit 300,000 subscribers, which is a huge amount, and I'm very, very grateful, so thank you so much. And as a little thank you, I have a little copy of my poetry book to give away to you guys for free. I will sign it and personalise it for whoever wins, so if you would like to win a copy of this book, I'm going to be doing the competition over on my Instagram account. Basically, there's going to be a post over there. I'm going to pin it to my profile, and I want you to go over there and leave a comment telling me what your favourite book of all time is. I will read through all the comments, I will pick a winner at random, and I will send you this copy of the poetry book. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, I will get it to you. It'll be signed, it'll be personalised for you, and yeah, it's just a little thank you to give back to you guys for all subscribing and being here with me on this journey. So Thank you so much. Remember, if you're new here, it would be great if you want to subscribe to this video. If you like this video, please leave a like because it really helps with engagement and getting more people to see my videos and that sort of thing. Also, if you liked it, please feel free to share it around on social media because that also really helps. If you'd like to help support my work and my channel, I do have Patreon where I have a Discord server where I chat with you guys. I post lots of little bits like behind the scenes stuff and photos and things like that, and at the higher tiers I have exclusive stickers and prints and that sort of thing. I also have merch available. I'm working on some cool new designs at the minute, and I think that's all the cool self-promotion stuff out of the way. Okay, I'm not very good at doing that stuff. But thank you so much for watching today. Please let me know your thoughts of Drake's poetry and all the misogyny that comes with it down in the comments below, and yeah, I look forward to reading them, and I will see you guys again very, very soon. Bye!